It's a vexing moral and ethical question that dominates the situation rooms of different nations over time. Is there ever a justifiable case to remove a tyrannical foreign leader? The 1973 New York Convention, covering internationally protected persons, prohibits the assassination of heads of state, and it's also outlawed under the laws of war established in the 19th century. Shannon BRINCAT joins us now, Senior Lecturer in Politics and International Relations at the University of the Sunshine Coast. Shannon, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, let me ask you this. Can the case ever be made to take the life of a tyrant for the greater good?
It's a very difficult and vexatious question, as you said, and I'm not advocating on any side of the position here. I'm just outlining the arguments for and against it that have been made historically in terms of the law and philosophy. The justifications coming from within one's own state, that is protecting the community, protecting human rights of other citizens, maintaining order and peace. These are far more established justifications for this coming from the side of political philosophy. The real difficulty is the question of our international obligations for those that are oppressed by tyranny or authoritarian rule beyond our borders. Of course, here having a universal human rights regime, as we do, implies that these should be somehow protected and enforced. But the juicy question, the problematic question is how do we do that? And this is where things are quite unsettled. Clearly, any legitimate use of force can only be made through a mandate of the United Nations Security Council. And without that, any use of force against a head of state or another nation should be treated as something illegal and as really imperiling international order. But that leaves the question of how do we protect other communities beyond our borders when these tyrannical acts are happening against them. And it's an unsettling question and time at the moment.
It is an unsettling question, Shannon, but what are the potential answers to that question?
The potential answers that I would suggest are very much a need for us to return to multilateralism and international order. We're seeing very much a breakdown or attacks made against the key principles of international liberal order, especially multilateralism. So any question or debate around this has to come from member states themselves. It should not be left to a single state to be a judge, jury and executioner of who they consider to be a tyrant. Indeed, the fundamental basis of international law and the international community is the sovereignty of other states, and particularly their heads of state, even though we may disagree with them politically or on whatever issue it is. And so I think this return to having a multilateral debate about this is a key way forward. Robertson QC was one of the advocates of this position, really saying that we should come together as an international community to come up with a crime of tyranny in international law. This would promote human rights, protect populations, and even strengthen the rule of law internationally. All of the things that are, of course, under immense attack in international society at the moment. But there's nothing to be said for individual states to go out and do this on their own. This would lead to immense instability, and it also would be doctrine prone to manipulation. And this has been one of the justifications for not granting a right of tyrannicide, because it would imperil order and every leader would become unsafe.
Yes, so it's not just purely the moral question, Shannon, from what you're describing. It's also looking forward and looking at the potential consequences, which could well include some kind of political instability going forward. The outcome is very unpredictable. Exactly.
It would lead to massive instability across international order, really imperiling that one key idea that we have of non-intervention that holds the international system together. And of course, there is that other practical issue of, okay, if you get rid of one tyrant, who do you know is going to replace them? It might be an even worse figure. This is the so-called Hydra problem from Greek myth, you know, the monster that has many heads, and when you chop off one head, another head grows back. So this is that problem of who would actually replace that tyrant, and you might make the situation worse. You've got all the issues of reprisals around there and so on. So yes, there's very many practical questions against that.
Shannon, is there ever a case where it can be justified against a leader of a foreign state?
I mean, there's been historical precedents, of course. A lot of the data set on political leaders shows that it's being used very rarely and always disputed in who is a tyrant and classified as such. But from my understandings and research, there's been about 10 leaders targeted internationally in the last 150 years. So it is very rare. Of course, the most famous one would be the planned assassination of Hitler during the Second World War, Operation Foxley, but that was shelved by the British, who decided to overcome Nazism comprehensively rather than target him individually and risk making him a martyr or having a worse Nazi leader. So there is a lot of historical precedents. Well, not many historical precedents, but a lot of discussion in international law around this, all the way back to classical jurisprudence and really the beginnings of international law, where tyrants were considered common enemies of humankind. So this is a key legal principle underlining a potential justification for this type of thing. But again, it's always a matter of debate. It's nothing settled, given that there isn't some clear international law direction here from the Security Council or the UN or anything like that. So it's something that's very much debated in jurisprudence, but nothing really further than that. So it's unfortunately speculative, even though it's such an important question.
Well, what does history tell us about what could change in terms of international law in the future? I mean, what you're an expert in this subject, obviously. What are your expectations of potential changes that we might see in the legal framework?
I don't think there will be a lot of change, unfortunately. I think we're seeing a broad shift away from the international order as we know it. And of course, one of the key turning events, the pivotal event really in this debate, was back in 2003 and the war in Iraq, which was made without a Security Council mandate, and justifications from the US and its coalition of the willing, which Australia was a part of, was that Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, that he was linked to the attacks on September 11, both of which were untrue, but nevertheless were used to justify a preemptive attack against Iraq and Hussein directly. I think this use of aggressive war outside of the Security Council framework has really let things unravel.
Okay. All right. Shannon, we do appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us here on the APAC network.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.